Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. I hope you're all having a great day. Today I want to touch on a topic that's been very prevalent in the last few months, especially this year in general, and that is, why do people hate AAA gaming so much? Now, I do want to preface this video with the fact that I don't think everybody hates AAA gaming. Clearly, some of the most profitable and popular games, such as Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto, Fortnite, and the likes, they're all AAA games, and their fan base is clearly devoted enough to stick around after all these years and all these flops. But within the last couple years in the gaming industry, we've noticed a very big trend of a lot of people dogging on AAAs and looking more towards the indie scene, the AA scene, and even just sort of more low-key releases. And that has a lot to do with the fact that it used to be that a AAA release was a mark of quality, and that a AAA release was not only an incredible achievement, but the very best that the medium had to offer. AAA games are sort of a tentpole that hold up the industry on their backs. At least that's how it used to be. But more and more, since the age of digital gaming, the idea that you can buy your games instantly on the storefronts of these different consoles and PC, and the fact that you're able to update these games real time, developers have gotten significantly more lazy and sloppy because of the ease of use it is to just send out a patch. Now, this is pretty common knowledge. People definitely understand that AAA games do not release as polished as they used to. Perfect example of that would have to be Jedi Fallen Survivor. The game had a lot of issues at launch, and people weren't really able to play it up to its proper standing point, and had they been given just a little bit more time, or had they just taken maybe another month or two to polish it up, it could have been a totally different situation, and it wouldn't even be an example I use. Personally though, I like to think that the idea that AAA games a lot of people dislike nowadays for more reasons than just bugs and not being polished upon release. Obviously that's kind of the obvious, like everybody kind of knows that is the idea of why people have issues with AAA gaming, but I actually think that it goes a lot deeper than that. AAA releases used to be known for not only their quality and the types of experiences you would get from those games and how big and grandiose they would be because they had a bigger budget behind them, but these developers used to use their titles as a way to show what can be done in the video game scene, that the medium can not only be a really impressive art form, but that it can surpass what a lot of people think it can do. Some obvious examples, of course, would be like the original Metal Gear Solid and GTA 3. Obviously, these games were really technically impressive for their time, but they also were a showcase of what you can do if you have a talented and professional team behind a big budget idea. Over time though, a lot of ideas have kind of been done, and there really hasn't been a lot of innovation over the course of the last decade. Now, I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that once we sort of hit the PS3 and the Xbox 360 generation, a lot of those ideas took off, and the gameplay and mechanics that were used in those games sort of became a base level for all of these developers to just make that experience again and again and again. I think a really good example of this is something like Skyrim. Obviously, Skyrim was a massive success, and many games tried to replicate the feeling that Skyrim gave you. So many publishers would put a giant quote from games journalists stating, hey, this game feels like Skyrim, and use that as a giant selling point to push their game above the other competition. And even though the game might stand on its own 2 feet by itself, and it might be a really great experience, the consumer goes into that experience expecting something like Skyrim. So if they do not get something like Skyrim, they're almost instantly let down. I think that example perfectly pinpoints the idea that we as the consumer have an expectation in our heads of what we want when we go into a video game. Whether that be we want the game to feel like something else, we want the game to be unique, we want the game's art style to be a certain way. We have these expectations that we go into, and when we start shaping the expectations of the games that we want to be like this other game, that creates a sort of cannibalization of our expectations. We start to eat into what we really want, and we sort of start to forget about it and more so want this game to feel like that other game that gave us that great experience. I think in a lot of ways, the fact that we've sort of hit the peak versions of certain genres, at least for this time period, has made us crave those experiences more and more because they're so unique and they're so interesting. Those experiences that we love become an expectation that we hold in our heads for future titles. We want every single title to be able to live up to this original idea. And that's true of things like sequels as well. The idea that like the original Metal Gear games, you know, they were simple stealth games, and then Metal Gear Solid blew them out of the water with the impressive technical display, of course, as well as the story and gameplay. And then every Metal Gear for about the next decade just kept improving on that formula and making it better and better. A lot of game franchises nowadays are pretty okay just putting out the same thing with each title, and they're okay only just tweaking things slightly, using a couple different asset flips, and then just putting out the same thing with just a little bit more content to make the consumer believe that they're getting a completely brand new product. And while yes, technically the consumer is getting a different product, they're so similar to what came before that your expectations automatically go back to what you originally felt like when you played that first great experience. No longer can that new title rest on its own laurels, but it has to rely on brand recognition as well as that original experience that gave you that endorphin rush. These companies are basically creatively destroying their brands because of the fact that they've created something incredible once, and in order to keep chasing that success, they don't know how to innovate, because once you sort of hit the peak top of something, it's very hard to go above again. We as humans have experienced vast amount of content over the course of hundreds and thousands of years that it's really hard to surprise and innovate when every story has already been told. So the idea that a studio wants to create something creatively different and new, it becomes much harder given the landscape of just us as humans. And certainly that puts pressure on developers and publishers to come up with something new and innovative when so many things have already been tried and done, especially in the form of video games. Video games used to be able to push technical boundaries because they were so limited in the beginning, and they just kept growing and evolving over time. But we're fastly approaching the point in which it's really hard to technically make something that is creatively new and different in a way that we've never seen before, because we've kind of seen everything at this point. The reason why AAA games are becoming such an afterthought for so many of us are because the indie scene and the smaller developers with really big and interesting ideas know their limitations and take their really creative ideas and force them to fit within their budget. I believe the reason so many indie developers have such amazing games and are becoming so impressive in the eyes of audiences are because they are new and they are fresh, and they are fitting within a certain niche that each person can sort of appreciate from a different perspective. Speaking from personal experience, I can confidently say that a lot of indie games these days are a lot more impressive and interesting to me than big AAA titles. A couple of really good examples, even if you just look at my Steam profile, would be like Deep Rock Galactic as well as Cult of the Lamb. These are two games that typically I really don't like the gameplay mechanics or the things inside of what the game is, but because they're done in such an interesting and creative way, it became something that I really enjoyed, and the game allowed me to get lost in their world. They became, in some ways, a really relaxing experience, but in a lot of other ways, a really just fun and innovative experience for me as a player. Obviously, these genres have been done, but what indie games tend to do a lot that I've noticed that AAA games don't is they take a lot of elements and ideas from other genres and games, and they think, what if we mash them together? What if we put a dungeon crawler with an Animal Crossing style life sim game, and you have Cult of the Lamb? You know, you just fill in the blanks with the creativity. So you say, hey, we've got these two really interesting gameplay ideas. What if now we filled in those interesting gameplay ideas with really interesting story as well as really cute characters? Same goes for Deep Rock Galactic. I've played 50 hours of that game completely solo, and that is a game that is technically meant for co-op. And I really do believe it's because when the developers made that game, they knew in their heads that some people were going to be playing that game solo, and so they worked in things to make the experience better for the player. And it's just those little touches that become so much better for the player and the consumer that I really have to appreciate and applaud indie developers for thinking of these things that a lot of big developers don't think about. I guess if I had to sort of summarize what I've been saying this whole video, I think AAA developers take a lot of things for granted. I think they take not only their audience for granted, but I think they take their own creative ideas for granted. I think a lot of it has to do with the culture of AAA gaming and the way that these studios really rely on crunch and just a lot of mindless work with not a lot of return outside of the monetary value. I think a lot of AAA developers are just really showing that they're really creatively bankrupt, or they have these different ideas, but because of the publisher they're under or because of the certain dynamic of the industry, they're not allowed to branch out. And I think that's why we're getting so many of these interesting indie games, because they're developers that now have no shackles. Keep in mind, obviously, these are all just my thoughts, but I think there is definitely some truth to what I am saying. It certainly feels like it anyway. But I would love to know what you think. Are AAA developers really starting to annoy you? Are you still enjoying AAA games? What is kind of your experience with this situation? I'd really love to hear from you, so please comment below. If you like this video, thank you for watching all the way to the end, by the way, if you're hearing this. Please consider liking and subscribing. It really helps out the channel, as well as just me in general, to get more eyes on my videos, so I really appreciate it. That's it. That's all I got. Thank you so much for watching, and you have a great day.